Christians talk a lot about a guy called Jesus. In fact, the word Christian comes from the word Christ, which is one of the titles given to Jesus. Today, at long last, Jesus makes his way onto the stage of Storytime with Josh. This story is set about 600 years after the story of Daniel, and by this point in time, Israel has become a part of the Roman Empire. This is Storytime with Josh, and this is how the birth of Jesus came about. Mary was a young Jewish woman who was engaged to marry a man named Joseph. But before they got married, she became pregnant. When Joseph found out, he said, "What's been going on? I need to call off the engagement. But I won't make a big deal of what she's done." But that night, an angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Joseph, you should continue with your plans to marry Mary, because the baby inside her is a gift from God's Spirit. It's like God said hundreds of years ago, 'I'm going to give a sign. A virgin will give birth to a son. Now when the son is born, you're to name him Jesus, because he will rescue people from their wrongdoings." So Joseph obeyed the angel and continued with his plans to marry Mary. Now in those days, the Roman emperor said, "I want to know how many people I rule over. Tell the people to go back to the towns of their ancestors so I can count them." Now Joseph was a descendant of King David, and King David came from a town called Bethlehem. So Joseph took his wife Mary, who was heavily pregnant by this stage, and they set off for Bethlehem to be counted. When Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem, the place was packed. There was nowhere comfortable for them to stay, but it was time for Mary to give birth. They found somewhere out of the way, and Mary gave birth to Jesus. They wrapped him in strips of cloth and laid him in an animal's feeding trough. Now that night, outside Bethlehem, there were some shepherds looking after their sheep. Suddenly, a dazzling angel appeared to them and said, "I have wonderful news. Tonight, the rescuer, God's promised king, has been born here in Bethlehem. You'll find him wrapped in strips of cloth, lying in an animal's feeding trough." Suddenly, the sky was filled with armies of angels singing and shouting and celebrating. After the angels had left, the shepherds said to each other, "Wow, let's go into town and check it out." So they ran into town and found Joseph and Mary, and Jesus wrapped in strips of cloth, lying in an animal's feeding trough. Well, after that, the shepherds went and told everyone they found, "God is amazing! Listen to what just happened." And everyone who heard it was astonished. But Mary quietly stored up these precious memories and often pondered them. The Bible records many stories about Jesus, and I'm going to give you a mini-series of stories on who is this man Jesus. For every Monday in the month of September, you get to hear a new story. And guess what? There are 5 Mondays this September. So tune in 2 weeks' time as we ask, who is this man Jesus? On Storytime with Josh.